Hello, and welcome to R.E.A.L.Talk Coaching Podcast, where we're reimagining everything about life. Today, we're here to sit with you in the real stuff transitions, healing, purpose, and power of what comes next. So let's dive in. Today, we want to talk about authenticity, and we want to ask, how much are you hiding? We have a special guest today that's going to help us with this conversation. We want to welcome Ms. Jeslyn Miller, owner and founder of Uniquely Lovely Designs. Jeslyn, welcome to the R.E.A.L.Talk podcast with us. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your company.
Thank you for having me. I'm really honored and nervous. I always have to get that out the way when we're talking about being authentic. Um, so my company's name is Unique and Lovely, also doing business as Unique and Lovely Designs. It all stemmed from an affirmation that my father used to speak over me when I was a child to help nurture my self-esteem. And as I got older and started kind of dabbling with like graphic design and things of that nature, um, my mom said, you're spending all this money buying other people's stuff. Why don't you, share your creations? And between my mom kind of planting that seed and the affirmation that had been spoken over for me for most of my life, Unique and Lovely was born with just that purpose and that premise of the things that make you unique make you lovely. And really, it just ties in perfectly with being authentically you.
That's great. I love affirmations.
Okay. Um, and so before we get started, we just want to let Jeslyn know that we are really, really excited for her to be here because she is someone we love and respect, as a colleague, former colleague, co-leader, a friend, and sister. And so we thank you for being here with us, having our what do I like to say, our living room conversation. And I know you talked a lot about affirmations and what that means about being unique, being true to who you are, right? And what does that mean? So when we think about being unique and being genuine, the word that we usually use is being authentic or having authenticity. And so I want to kind of step back and define those words because we use a lot of words out here nowadays in this social media atmosphere, right? That sound like buzzwords or sound like trendy words, but authenticity and being authentic have been around since the dictionary's been around. And so when we think about being authentic, we think about um, being authentic is an adjective, right? And it just means being genuine. And when you think about authenticity, it is the quality of being genuine, right? And so that in itself is one of the things that we think of when we're talking about being authentic, being genuine. But a lot of people kind of contribute that as being real.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't personally, I don't know if I even like that term being real because I don't even know what that means. To me, being real isn't the same thing as being genuine, right? And that leads me to when people talk about being authentic or having authenticity,
Mm-hmm.
the misconception is that means I can say whatever I want. And that is what is always connected to the being real part, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, I'm just being real. I'm just saying whatever I want, no matter, what it is, who it hurts,
Mm-hmm.
just because you're being real. That is not the same as being authentic
Mm-hmm.
or having authenticity. And I just wanted to make sure we point that out as a misconception. It also doesn't mean that there are no boundaries, right?
Yes.
Being authentic means having some consistency
Mm-hmm.
in who you are as a person and how that shows up in everyday life. So when we say being authentic or having authenticity, what we're really saying is how is your inside aligned with your outside? How are your values, your words, your actions, your thoughts, your beliefs, your experiences? How does all of that flow together from the inside to the outside so that people are seeing who you really are?
I love that. I love that you broke it down like that because I'm a visual person. So I think in visuals. So I look at alignment kind of being the overarching umbrella. And it's like, okay, when you're aligned with, like you said, with what you're thinking, what you're doing, how you're maneuvering throughout life is all in alignment, then that is you genuinely being yourself. That's you being authentic. Whereas, like when you talk about people saying being real, even that is it kind of comes off as performative. You're performing some aspect of your personality, sometimes people might say, oh, being real, and they link that with being relatable, which isn't necessarily the same. So when I think of authenticity, it's not a one-off thing. Like authenticity has multiple components within it for you to show up who you truly are, who you are at your core, who you are when no one's watching.
That's so true. Coaches Tara and Sharon, would you like to add your thoughts about that?
Well, what I'll say is that we should be aligned with everything to do with our values and our thoughts and feelings when we're being as authentic as possible. And I know we're going to discuss, like how much of that do we really want to share with others? Like how are people perceiving who we are or what our values are based on what they see of us when they're engaging with us?
And Coach Tara.
I like the thinking of it in alignment, right? I think that is a very different way and interesting way to look at being authentic. As we were preparing for this episode and doing different things, values kind of kept coming up when you talked about authenticity and how do your aligning your values with who you are and how you show up in how you are then seen in the world. So I thought that was interesting because I wonder how often do we hide sometimes kind of our values, right? And I don't think we necessarily think of that as not necessarily being our authentic selves. I think sometimes, maybe we hide a value out of protection, or out of fear that it will be perceived incorrectly, right? Or perceived as being offensive. So it'll be interesting just to kind of see our own thoughts around those things. And like Sharon said, kind of how we show up in different spaces. And do we always show up the same way? And does that mean that we're not being our authentic selves? So just keep going, see where we go.
That reminds me of something. And if anybody out there has ever taken the DISC assessment, the DISC assessment, DISC means dominance, influence, stability, and compliance, or something like that. But basically, that's what it is. And so the DISC assessment tests your natural abilities and natural personality traits in your natural state versus how you have to adapt in this case to work, because I've only ever taken those for work. And I just remember having it's been consistent. I've taken this test like 3 times, ladies, and it's always the high S, absolutely high S. S is for stability. I like I like foundations. I'm a process person. I want to be consistent. I want people to come in to a place and know that these are the processes, these are the policies, this is what you have to do in order, you know, to perform the functions of your job or whatever. And so, but I've also had a fairly high I because I care about people. I like people. Now, I'm not like a people person in the sense of let's all just happily go to happy hour, but it is about making sure that you have what you need to do what you need to do, making sure that you're okay emotionally. Those are the things that make my eye high. And I noticed that when I went into the federal government, things totally changed. My C surpassed the I, and my S barely was on the same line as the C. And the reason is the compliance. All the positions that I was in was about protecting myself and our employees and even the supervisors from making the mistake of not following the law, making a mistake for not following policies or processes correctly. And so now I had this really high compliance level when I always considered myself a bit of a rule breaker and a rebel. And it did not, it was very difficult to adapt to that because while I like a foundation, while I like processes, I'm also a bit of, I've got a free spirit, and it's kind of hard to put those two together sometimes, the high IS and the high SC, and feel like I was still being me. Can anybody relate to that?
I definitely can, because I think for mine, when I did the disc assessment, it was S and C were close. I can't remember which one was higher. It might have been S for both. Like it just adjusted a little bit. And I remember like my original supervisor, like when I first came in, was surprised, but it was based off of like kind of how I was raised and things like that. But I think in it's not something I intentionally did, but this is where I'll bring in alignment again. It's like stepping into career choices and things that were in alignment with who I was and how I expressed myself. So then I didn't necessarily have to adjust or kind of like um, suppress. And I've tried, and it's just like, oh no, this it doesn't work. So now I'm just like, yeah, okay. It doesn't work. It's too much effort to try to show up any other place. And I think if that's the kind of the goal or the desire, it can help with staying in alignment. Now, of course, you have like survival type of stuff. You have needs. We all have to eat. We all need to keep a roof over our head, things like that. So sometimes you have no choice. But then that's where stuff like boundaries can come into play. And it's like, it may not be you're not being authentic, but it's like, hey, do these people, um, if who I am at my core, is this individual safe here? No, then I will, I can just maneuver, I do what I need to do the bare minimum, get in and get out. And then I spend the rest of my time making sure that I'm surrounded by people that I can be myself with. So I'm not losing myself. It makes me think of one of the kind of, I guess, sessions that we did when we were allowed to meet within our group. I'll speak of it that way. We were talking about uh, what was it? Was it the professional personal boundaries? That or something else. I can't remember the title of it, but it talked about, staying grounded, having your group of friends so you don't forget who you are. So in those cases where you do have to be in environments where it's like, no, it's not about showing up and, you know, um, behaving however you want. It's very specific, it's very rigid, and you make sure that you have that core group or your village to keep you like to remind you like this is who you are, this is what you do. So that separation. What you do doesn't have to be who you are. In a perfect world, it'd be both. But it's okay to have like this is just what I do. This is not who I am. And I think that'll still help you. It still kind of keeps you grounded a bit.
Yeah, that's true. And I think the first question people would need to ask themselves is, who am I, right?
Yes.
Who am I? Because if you're hiding from yourself, it doesn't even matter how you show up with other people, right? And so authenticity starts with private truth telling. What are your values?
Mhm.
What are your real thoughts when no one else is around you, right?
Mhm.
What are your actions when there's no one else around you? Um, they say integrity is doing the right thing even when no one else is around. But authenticity is kind of finding out who you are when nobody else is
Mhm.
around, right? And so, you know, when you go about the process of trying to even figure out who you are so that you can present your true self to the world, to your workplace, to church, to grocery store. Um, when you go about that, sometimes you will disrupt relationships. And we've talked about that. And I think a lot of that is when you do start to find out who you are genuinely, you might disturb, some of those relationships that you have. And we had talked about boundaries, Jeslyn, in another a previous episode. And part of those boundaries that you set up aren't boundaries that are intended to harm people, but they're kind of intended to insulate you from harm, right? And the reason I say that is so I am an introvert, and I've always had a front facing position, or a position where a lot of people would come to me. There are a lot of team meetings. There are a lot of gatekeeping where people would come to me to get to the people that I actually supported. And I had to put on that face when on the inside, I was just like, I just want to do my work. I don't want to greet nobody. I don't want to tell anybody who they can and can't see. I don't want to sit there in any meetings. I certainly don't want to sit in meetings only to go to lunch with y'all, only to go to happy hour with y'all. Like, because my battery would be drained so low, so fast. And so, but I would have to put on that front, that smile. And for years, I did that because I didn't really know who I was. For years, I did that because I did not have any boundaries set up.
Mhm.
And once I started setting up boundaries, it kind of did disrupt some of my work relationships, not on purpose, but it was the only way that I could survive and do my job, excellently.
Yeah, no, I definitely get that. Especially like going from that initial question of like, who am I? And that is such an important question to ask, especially without distractions or outside interference, and also realizing that who you are in one setting doesn't necessarily translate to who you are um, somewhere else, and that who you are, it's okay for it to change and evolve and grow as you experience more. So it's not something that's like static, it's dynamic. It should be ever kind of changing and evolving. Um, and I do think for a lot of people, it's the fear of like, who will I lose? And that's what sometimes that makes me a little bit sad for folks because they never, well, I won't say never, but people don't think about who will you gain? Like, what will you gain by embracing who you are? It's usually like, oh, it's the negative first. Like, well, this person that I'm in a relationship with, or this job that I have, like, if I show up differently, I'm going to lose these people. And it was like, yeah, maybe. But if they don't make space for you to evolve and grow, which we're all supposed to do as long as we're living, then that's not the person or the people or the environment that's in alignment with who you are and where you're supposed to be. Um, and that, like, when it comes to talking about authenticity, and for my brand also, that's really, it now feeds into each other. Like, it's just a circle. Whereas before, initially, I was like, okay, this is kind of like the mission. And then I was like, in my own life, I'm like, oh, let me still do stuff. Let me still try to be relatable. Let me still try to not make waves. And then I realized even when I was trying not to make waves, I was still making waves because who I was at my core was still seeping through. Even when I feel like I was operating at maybe like 30%, being myself. And it's like, okay. But the more kind of I became more intentional and more like in tune with, okay, this is what the mission of Unique and Lovely is going to be, and it's about authenticity. Then it's like, yep, and so now I'm being authentic so that it translates to whether I'm talking about Unique and Lovely, whether I'm talking about stuff at work. It doesn't matter where I am because you're gonna get me wherever I show up, I am. And that's the truth for other people too. And it is frightening and it is scary. But I think it's important to lean into it. Like just because you're afraid or you're nervous or what have you doesn't mean that you don't. That's a sign not to do it. I think it's what I would want for people if I were to give advice is to be curious. Be curious about yourself, be curious about others, and I feel like that's a key to being able to interact better in a more genuine type of space. Like kids are curious. So it's like tap back into the young child, your inner child, and hopefully you'll connect with other person's inner child and you'll see where all of that can go.
It's so funny that you say be curious because that is really one of the tenets of coaching, right? Is curiosity is key because curiosity shows that you care about yourself, you care about others, you care about the situations, you care about how to get out of situations, you care about how to move forward. That is all curiosity. So I thank you for that because that's a coaching word. And so, speaking of coaching words, I actually have a coaching question for our audience to just reflect on. And I actually typed this out. It says, if no one was watching, what would you change about how you show up tomorrow? And if you want to share that in the comments, you can. So thanks, Jeslyn, for listening to my little version of what authenticity means to me. So thank you. And I'm going to pass it over to Sharon now.
All right. Well, all right. Well, you know what I'm going to talk about, Jeslyn, with you is about, being fearful of being authentic, because we kind of had a little bit about this conversation before we came online, right? We talked about how we hide behind things. So since we've been virtual for a long time, and even in the office, we don't always have those in-person meetings like we used to. And so we can turn our cameras on. Some people have avatars and all kinds of things that um, make you think about what the person on the other side really is versus who they actually are, who we actually are. And those fears can come from past traumas, you know, they could, and that trauma could either be internal or external to the environment and the space that they're in. Fear of, you mentioned, of who you might lose once they really know who you are. Of being rejected for your thoughts or beliefs, uh, and it's exhausting to try to continue that facade, I'm gonna say, because we are so worried about others. Is that people pleasing that comes up for us? So I wanted to hear from you, like when you are in that thought or in that space, what is it that comes up for you about being fearful of being authentic?
What comes up for me? For me, I've gotten to the point where I lean into that feeling. So before, I used to believe like, okay, people that were confident and showed up the way that I wanted to show up, that they never felt fear, they never felt anxiety, they never felt uncertainty. And clearly I was very wrong. Um, and I kind of realized like where like courage actually lies is feeling those feelings and still doing it anyway. And so once that kind of shift happened, then I was like, okay, I can show up in a meeting where I'm talking to people and I'm like, I am nervous. Like despite the fact that I've done training, I've done onboarding, I've moderated like events and stuff like that with like very little experience, being extremely shy and introverted. I was like, well, what do I have to lose? Like, we're just gonna go with it, it's not gonna be the end of the world. Even tying into like kind of like the affirmation and like I know Sharon, you were saying you love affirmations. One of the things that I did specifically for training, because I used to get like really bad anxiety before doing training, I came up with an affirmation and I recorded myself saying it. And I would listen to myself speak to myself about like it was something about, training and being anxious and whatever. Like even though I'm anxious, I know this information and I can do blah blah. I can't even remember because I haven't listened to it in so long, but it was that type of way, like kind of alchemy. So like on any of my personal social media accounts, you'll see some type of reference of like The Alchemist based off of like the book by Paulo Coelho. I may be butchering his name. Um, but it's like my favorite book, and that was a life-changing kind of novel for me because it's a fiction book, but it's basically like you're turning and you're transmuting these different energies into something else. So like one of kind of the sayings that I have is like, the alchemist turning, ideas into creations or turning negativity into something beautiful, and that kind of process. Like, yep, I have the fear, but I'm going to turn it into me being able to do something or me being able to say something. And I've found since taking that approach that people resonate with it because I'm not the only one and they're not the only one. And it basically it lends a hand. It actually kind of initiates connection with folks. Like even in this age of social media and all the filters and all the performance and this stuff, people are still looking for genuine kind of connection and genuine feelings. And also, when you show up as yourself, you give other people permission to show up as who they are. And they may never even tell you, like, hey, you inspired me. But it's like, oh, if that person can do it, I can do it. So it's kind of like that's like the long-winded answer to that question of like, that's what kind of goes through my mind. It's like, okay, like as long as I'm being true to myself, as long as I'm in alignment with like what I say, of who I say that I am, my morals, my values, my beliefs, what have you, like this will work its way out. This will be beneficial. And so far, it's proven true. So I'm just like, okay, if it's not broken, then why fix it? Let me just go.
That's a great way to think about it. And like you heard me say, I love affirmations. I have been saying them for many years. I would speak them not directly to my children, but I would say them out loud for my children, as well as, my nieces, nephews, grandchildren, all of my future generations. So I'm big on affirmations. So I love that your dad spoke them over you and you continue in that process. Um, and one of the things though I want to go back to with the fear though is that as women, as Black women, as you know, African Americans just in general, we have that fear, right? We have that fear of being accepted for who we are. If I am with you all hanging out and having fun, we're gonna be talking, we're gonna say some things a certain way, and then when we're in the workplace or around others that we might not be comfortable with, may not know, then we don't want to be perceived as we're not polished sometimes, or we are not educated. We want to make sure that they know our titles or where we went to school or, things of that nature. And then like, how important is that really in who we are?
Yeah.
So tell me, like, when you are in those spaces where, hey, you're with the friends and you're like, how we talk. And then when you are in these other spaces where even though you might be able to turn your camera off and not have, because I've seen you. So and I know that you are very intelligent. You can, lead, and you have led many things. I'm still listening to books because of the book club that we had. Um, and so, what makes Jeslyn to say, okay, in this moment, I'm not going to show Jeslyn.
Um, so there's something that my mentor said, one of my mentors had said to me, and she was like, it's kind of like a question and how she uses it to determine whether she's like safe, whether this is a person that's in alignment. I'll keep using the word alignment versus safe. And it's like, can you trust your textured soul with this person? I'll shout her out. I call her Miss Bruce. She used to be my teacher. Um, so and so that's kind of, it goes in a loop. Like, is my textured soul all that I am safe in this space? And if not, it doesn't mean I don't still show up. I don't show up as who I am, but what I say, I adjust what I say or what I might speak on. And it's also funny kind of that you asked this question because I was having a conversation with my best friend earlier, and she was talking about somebody asking her some type of question. And I'm like, that wasn't even a good faith type of question. It's like, if you've got to learn to kind of like, this isn't even, we're not about to have a real discussion. You're not gonna kind of siphon energy from me. So my presence, yes, I'm still going to be here and I'm still going to be unique and lovely no matter where I show up, but you're not going to get the full unique and lovely experience. In the age of everything being a subscription, you get the free version. Everybody else gets the version that they go pay for. You don't get everything for free. No, you get to be in my presence. And you can say, I've seen Jeslyn, and she might have laughed or gave me a smile. She was respectful. Cool. You get the basic plan. The other levels, the other tiers are for people that I can be my textured soul with. And even even those tiers, there's different levels that, the people that you work with. And sometimes the people that you work with are also your friends, and sometimes they become family and things like that. There's different levels, but at every level, I'm still there. I occupy every level. It's just how expansive do you want to experience these things? And if you want to experience me fully, then it needs to be a environment where I can show up fully. If the environment's not big enough, so to speak, for me to show up fully, I won't show up fully there. And then I'll make sure that my time in that environment is limited because I'm like, okay, cool, I'm out. Bye, y'all. And that's something I had to grow into because I used to think like, oh, when you're at these work environments, like you're supposed to be friendly, you have to talk to people. And I was like, I don't have to do nothing. As long as I'm not being disrespectful, I've already exceeded what I'm supposed to be doing here. I'm not disrespectful and I do my job and I do it well. I don't actually have to go out and mingle and do stuff because most people, if they haven't met themselves at the level that like have been forced to meet myself, we're already gonna clash. And I'm no longer at the stage in my life where I feel like it's my job or my right to try to convince people to move faster than where they're supposed to be, what their pace is in the journey of them discovering who they are. And I know, like, I've heard about this term, like radical acceptance and things like that. And I won't pretend that I'm there because sometimes I'm just like, ugh, I get upset with people. But I realize whether I'm upset or not, they have that right. They have the right to not want to be curious. They have the right to not want to be in alignment. They have the right to still be surrounded by people that really cause them pain, whether it's like mentally, emotionally, physically, what have you. And I am like, I'm not here to save you. I can show you a way of living, but it's not my job to like, hey, I'm going to pull you out from here and place you somewhere else that you may not want to be. It was kind of like that's kind of how I've gotten to, just based off of experience in life and also being exposed to people that have passed on their lessons to me so that I didn't have to learn it, the hard way. I hope that answers your question. I feel like I went off on a tangent.
No, oh, you're fine. You're fine. I love the free version versus the paid subscription version. Like, and then as you were saying that, I was like, even with the paid subscription version, there might be different levels to that subscription. You may not all get the same paid version. You might have the silver, bronze, silver, gold, platinum, So yeah.
Hey, some people have the paid version with ads because it's cheaper. Some people have it without the ads. Some people have the one with the live TV. Some people have the one where it's the multiple screens on in the same household. It really just depends. And the initial tiers that you might have might change as you just experience life because more stuff has occurred, more things, you've expanded, you've grown, you've shifted. That's how I've been able to protect myself and stay true to myself because I had to realize like, yeah, some people, no, you don't get access at all, free or not. Like you just get to know that there's a Jeslyn app, so to speak, using that same analogy. There's a Jeslyn service, and that's it. That's all you get to know. You don't get to know about none of the tiers. You're not eligible. It's not available in your country. Like that's where we're at. And I just keep on going. And that's what's worked, for me so far.
It's interesting. You just said something, and my 53-year-old brain forgot what you said, but it did trigger something that I was thinking. It was, so you're not the same at 25 as you are at 45, right? So your version of authenticity was different at 25 than it is at 45. The problem is you're still traveling in the same packs, right? At 25 as you were at 45. And so when you start to develop, when you start to like change your perspective, when you start to grow and your thoughts, your experiences, the people you expose yourself to, the situations you go through, um, they all change who you are as you grow. But some people try to hold you back to who you were at 25, mistakes and all, right? And so they're not looking at you as you are still authentic, you are still yourself, even though your values may have been refined, your thoughts and actions and feelings may have been refined. As you grow, they're still like, they consider you now as fake or this or that or the other because you're not that same person. So when you were talking about, oh, now I know what you were talking about. When people have the right not to evolve, people have the right not to, not to be authentic. They have the right, to not do all these things. Well, when you're surrounded by family or by friends or even by your coworkers, because say you've been in a place since you were 22 and now you're 42 and things have changed in you, um, it's even more difficult to navigate those paths when you can't even be the person you're destined to be if people keep trying to hold you at the standards you were at 20 some years ago.
Yeah, no, that's very true. And that speaks to the fear I feel like people have of leaving. Because like if you can no longer expand in a certain space, whether it's the space of a relationship, the space of a family, the space of a job, that actually means that you've outgrown it. Like if we're thinking about literal objects, once you have water in a cup, once there's no more space, it starts to just overflow. That doesn't mean that something's wrong with the water or the cup. That means you actually need a bigger container. And so sometimes I think people are actually afraid of that. afraid of like, well, who am I to do something different? Who am I to be bigger and more expansive than the environment that I'm in or than the relationship that I'm, in? And that's a question. Like, yes, there's time that you could spend trying to answer that question, but it's also like that question is none of your concern. It's also what other people think of you is none of your concern. I know that there's some people that look at me as the villain, and I'm like, great, that's fine for my ego. I like to play a little villainess, and I go on by my business because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if I've tried or how I left the situation. And that's not to say that, you just go through life like a wrecking ball, but even when you are trying your best to say, hey, I want to do X, Y, and Z. I want to go ABC. I want to go this way, whatever. People might still be upset. So sometimes, yes, you can inform them of where you're going, and maybe they'll also try to go with you, but that might not be their journey. That might not be where they're supposed to go. Maybe you're supposed to separate. I had this conversation with one of my sisters. So I like to joke and say both of my parents were crazy because I have a 10-year gap between one of my sisters, and then the youngest one is like 23 years. But with the one with the 10-year gap, she just turned 25. And I told her, it's like around that time was around the time that I started noticing the separation of some friendships that I thought were going to be forever. And it's just because our minds were going in different directions. But I also told her, like, that doesn't mean that it's the end. It could be just the path is separating for it to come back together stronger and better so that you can actually appreciate the friendship or the relationship. But don't fear going in a different direction. Fear never seeing where that direction was going to go because you were too busy looking back. Like you just go forward, like, okay, I'm a trust. Have faith or, whatever your belief system is. One of the other things that I like have also started quoting recently, and I think it's a Snickers commercial. It's one of those candy commercials where this man is doing a tattoo and it's like it's supposed to say no regrets, but it ends up saying no regrets. Like there's a misspelling. So that's why I'll say it's like no regrets, and I just do it. No regrets, I'm just gonna go. Like this is where I'm going. Um, and I think if people just leaned into it, it's like, look, life is full of choices. You can choose to stay where you are and be upset, or you can choose to see what else is out there. And if you've at least like chosen to see what else is out there, even if it brings you back to where you were, you don't have to ever wonder what if because you took advantage of that choice. And that's kind of where I'm just like, no regrets. I just go. I just you just do it. And yes, there were some friendships that had ended. There were jobs clearly that I left, but there was so much more that I gained because I decided to choose to do something different, to expand beyond kind of the current situation and environment that I was in.
Yeah, that is great. It's a great segue to a question I want to throw out there to our audience that are listening is what's one part of yourself that you feel you have to hide to be accepted? And in addition to that, to tag onto that, so what would it feel like to share that part of you, even in a small way? So put your comments in the chat and let us know, your answers to that question, as comfortable as you may feel with answering that. And I'm going to now turn it over to Coach Tara.
Thank you. So we've talked a lot, Jeslyn. You've shared a lot of insights with us, and we really appreciate it. One thing that you mentioned that kind of really stood out was when you were talking about how authenticity can change as you grow and as you have different things happen in your life and different experiences and different things. And you talked about how you are always aligned in who you are, and it's just kind of a matter of what the space is giving you in which you give it, right? So if you are comfortable, depending on your level of comfort or what have you, then that is what you are bringing to the space. But you are always authentic in what you are bringing, is what I heard you say. So then my question to the group Because I do think that that is true, right? I think that we do, when we look at it like that, I think that we do tend to be authentic more times than we may think that we're not. We just choose how much of ourselves do we give to different spaces. But what's the difference between being private and actually being hidden?
That's a good question. I definitely think intention is is a key component versus being private versus being hidden. Because with hiding, there's usually there's some type of shame. So it's like, oh, I can't share this for whatever the reason is, versus being private is this person's business? Is this information that they need to know? And also it's like, I'm not shameful of sharing this information. It's just not something that I'm just gonna broadcast, you know? Um, I typically like to think in like analogies, right? So like you think about like a wallet and your cards. Are you ashamed of the cards, the debit card, the credit card number, whatever? No. But is it everybody's business to know what your full credit card number, debit card number is? No. So it's like, oh, I'm private with this information. Maybe protection. I'm protecting this information because this is important. This is valuable to me versus I'm ashamed of this information or this aspect of who I am. And so even if somebody asks me, I don't want to say anything. That's kind of how I differentiate the two.
Coach Sharon, Coach Terri, what do you think?
I'm in full agreement. I don't even think right now I can add anything to that.
I'm the same way. I think Jeslyn had, explained it perfectly. I can't add anything to that.
Yeah, when you mentioned intent, I was like that kind of really summed it up. And that was really a good way to describe the difference between the two, and how we are showing up, or what type of information, what is the intent. And I do like how you talked about sometimes how hiding something can be more about, sometimes can also be related to feeling some sort of a shame, or maybe even being scared. And so I like those differences, and I like that idea of thinking about your intent when you're showing up in spaces, and you're either giving all of yourself, or how you're parsing how much you give out. So that was interesting. So in this
Wait, Sarah,
okay.
just Coach Terry, real quick, because that is so important, the shame part, right? Look, we're all human, and no one should have to feel like they have to hide their true selves because of shame. And a lot of times when I think of shame, I think of people who have been harmed emotionally, physically, mentally. And I just wanted to put that out there. If that is you, please seek professional help, because you should not ever feel like you have to hide who you are because someone has shamed you into doing that. So I just wanted to say that. Thanks, Coach Tara.
Absolutely. Thank you, Coach Terry. That was very important. So thank you for giving our audience that message. Miss Miller, coaches, has there been a moment in your life when hiding felt safer than being seen?
Yeah. Definitely. From I well, I'm 35 now. So there was a significant part of my life where I was hiding for safety reasons, because who I was just showing up um it wasn't accepted. They didn't know whether it was like in different environments, whether regardless of what the environment was, it was a different energy that I brought. Before I even knew what authenticity was, being genuine, any of those words, I think I was just living it. And it does agitate people, it irritates people. And so especially like when you're a child and adolescence and teenager, you just want to fit in. Like you're kind of like, I don't being especially back then, being an outlier is not safe because people can easily point to you and say, hey, that person's doing something different. And instead of, again, being curious, having conversations with themselves and saying, why is this bothering so much? It's just way easier to be like, they're the problem, not me. Um, So like in my experience, I used to get bullied a lot. And so I was like, hey, if I just kind of conform, if I maybe I'm quiet or maybe I'll make some jokes or whatever, I can just kind of go with the flow and I can just hide. I was hiding in plain sight. I'm actually really good at that. Um, and so that's where I kind of survived, like maybe I'll say like the first half of my life. And then I found again, like even with doing that, it's people still had an issue. And I was like, well, gosh, if I'm hiding, it's a problem. If I'm not hiding, it's a problem. Um, but yeah, I think that experience is actually now being an adult looking back was necessary for me to be able to get to this point of being just like radically authentic, regardless of how anybody else is feeling, because I already tried it their way and it didn't work. So I was like, okay, this isn't working either way. So I'm gonna stop hiding.
Wow, I feel like I am walking in her shoes on that one. What do you say, Coach Tara?
So how do we find the courage though, right? Like how do we find the courage to be our authentic selves, right? How do we find the courage to say, I'm going to leave this space and go find my space?
You know, I would say for me, when I felt enough was enough. When I'm listening and look, hearing the question that you had just asked about a moment in my life when I felt it was safer to hide. So about a relationship that I was in and how I felt, it was easier just to make sure that everything, just went along to what the person wanted and how they were, but it wasn't a good thing for me. I kept suppressing who I was to basically make sure that that person was okay, I guess. Or just so it wouldn't cause, confusion and things like that. Until I felt like I can't do this anymore. It's going to be me or them. And I love me. And so when enough was enough for me, that's when I felt that strength to come on and say, okay, these are the things that I need to do for me to be a better me, despite what that person thinks or anybody else thinks. And so that's how I feel when you feel that enough is enough. And only an individual knows that point for themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeslyn.
I was just gonna add to that. It's like either you're gonna implode or explode because it's not sustainable. Like that suppression, that level of suppression is not sustainable. And I guess just advice, a different perspective depending on the type of person that's listening. If you're the type of person that at this stage you still care more about others, you care more about, I want the other person to be okay and you're okay being on the back burner. Kind of think of it like this. Once the kind of the expression happens, you care so much about this other person, don't you want to make sure that you're not the cause of that harm by like that explosion, that you're able to interact and react in the best way with intention versus like this, I couldn't even control it because I've been trying to act like I've been trying to kind of go with the flow or go under the radar. For those that do, like, no, I love myself and I'm important, it would seem like it's kind of like a no-brainer. Um, and the other thing is like life can be long and short at the same time. We just have to take advantage of the moments that we have because none of us know when our time is up. And even 1 second of suppression could really be too long, depending on if you could see the full amount of time that you have in your life. And so sometimes it's just changing the way that you're viewing a situation. Maybe you're not necessarily at the point where like enough is enough, but it's just like, I want else. I want more. I want different, those type of things that might be like, okay, let me just try this, or let me do something different, or let me stop kind of like suppressing myself and harming myself by being somebody that's not being in misalignment.
Yeah, and so and I've I've been there where you were, Coach Sharon, been there where you were, Miss Jesslyn. And also to answer that question, yeah, there have been several instances for me where I've tried to hide my true self. Um, I- and just like Jesslyn said, I didn't know what being authentic even meant. I was just, you know, living, like just moving through the world. And I just remember sometimes I just made stupid decisions, based on whatever. And I didn't want to be the person who was looked at as that's that chick that made that dumb decision, and that goes back to, fear, failure, and letting other people down that I talked about in episode 4. But also, when I look at who I was when I was in my 20s, oh my gosh, I just wish I had loved that girl more, I just wish I had loved her just a little bit more.
Yeah, I do kind of want to speak to what you just said, and even um, people that might think or feel the same way that you do. I feel like we also have to realize that a lot of this stuff is still relatively new. So it like we're quite literally still building, like when we're talking about authenticity and alignment, all of these are actually very new words as far as like the intention behind it, what we mean when we say these things. And
Mhm.
so all of us, all of the coaches, everybody listening, we need to give each other grace because we didn't know better. So like I was born in the 90s and I know I'm a baby, but okay, that's just a hop skip away. And that wasn't being taught widely enough then. So like with that kind of understanding, we're doing pretty good for that short amount of time. Only about, again, I'm 35, so only about 35 years. We're not even at a century yet of like this being normal language and type of being able to like kind of pass this down between generations.
Right.
So it's important to give grace. We're figuring it out as time goes on, and we should also be proud of the work that us as a collective and individually are doing to now spread this gospel and spread this information and be vulnerable so that people can know you're not alone. I also was in that space, or I'm still in that space. And also, at any moment in time, you can decide to do something different.
Thank you for saying that because we do forget to give ourselves grace in moments. And yeah, I thank you for saying that.
Absolutely. You're right. The thinking about people as being authentic and showing up authentic, and what does it mean for you to have authenticity as a person, right, is relatively new. It's funny because when we first started talking about this conversation about authenticity and authentic, I was like, well, it actually, the definition sounds like it's talking about a thing versus a person, right? When we originally think about genuine, we think about things, right, that are pure and genuine, or like a diamond or a tapestry or something. We didn't really align, I don't think, authenticity like with people. At least not that I can remember when I was growing up, and I'm 10 years your senior. So it's even younger than you, in my mind, this concept, this kind of conversation around human beings being authentic and having some quality of authenticity. I think, like you reminded us, it is relatively new, and we should give ourselves grace and not not overwhelm ourselves with trying to figure out, what does it mean, and are we being authentic, and and all of these other things. Maybe we've always been authentic, and we're just only questioning it because it's a thing now,
Yeah.
right? Because someone said, "We bring your authentic self, to work," and now we're like,
Mhm.
"Oh, what
Like,
does
was I
that mean?
not doing it
Am
before?
I authentic?" Like, now we start asking the question, right? Like, well, am I authentic? What does it mean to be authentic? Who we've all maybe we've already been it, right? And just because it's a new thing, a new title, a new slogan, a new brand, we're questioning ourselves.
That
Um,
I'm so glad that you brought up new brand because I'm not saying that for those that have written any books or just had any TED Talks or whatever about it, that it's all a part of some type of marketing thing, but we have to realize the society that we live in. And for some of these things, even though it can have positive reach and impact, some of the attention of these terms and phrases that are coined are just it's marketing. Sometimes it is to get you to question yourself. Sometimes the questioning is a good point. Sometimes it actually isn't. What I would like for when we're having these discussions, and I appreciate it here, is the caveat, the nuance that we're adding to it. Um, you don't automatically assume that you're not doing something. And I love the fact like, oh, maybe I was always authentic. You were who you were before there were any type of classifications, words, buzzwords, whatever. Um, and that's important to kind of remember. Like if we're always starting from a place of love and grace from ourselves, that doesn't mean that you can't expand and you can't change your mind and you can't grow. But it's better to start there than from a place of like, oh, I'm not doing something and I need to do this. It could be like, hey, I already have this and I can add this to what I already have.
So true.
mhm. That's awesome. Like, I mean, I'm
Sometimes we just sit in stuff. We just sit with it because we can't really say anything.
one, I'm so excited at the direction this conversation is going. I mean, Jeslyn, you have really shared some really valuable nuggets and insights in this conversation. You have really expanded the thought and the idea of authenticity. I love how you talked about alignment. I love how you talk about intent. I love how you talk about grace. I love how you talk about showing up for others, for yourself. I love how you talk about protection and safety and aligning all of that with being true to yourself. I feel like a lot of this has kind of gone back to one of the points that Terri made earlier, which is having that real conversation with you, right? Asking yourself those questions and telling yourself the truth about who you are, what you like, what you don't like, what kind of spaces really fill you where you can be free to have that open dialogue, let your hair down, or those spaces where they get the free version where you just need to come in, get the job done, and everybody going about their business. But I like how, at the end of the day, from this conversation, from the words that I've gathered from you, Jeslyn, it's really personal. And there really may not be a checklist that we can say, oh, if I'm this, and that, then I'm showing up authentic and as my authentic self, and I'm bringing my authentic self into a space. You're always that, right?
Yeah.
So it's just a matter of maybe how much you give in the space. So we appreciate you and thank you for all of the nuggets, the wisdom, the analogies that you gave. Stories, we can tell you are a storyteller, that is a gift that you have. So thank you for bringing that to the podcast. And so I want to give you an opportunity, Jeslyn, to just leave us with some final words, some words of wisdom, either indefinitely, please let us know what you have going on next.
So I will, but I want to explain why I'm laughing because I'm always on joke time, even when I'm supposed to be serious. Y'all got all this because y'all are at the paid, the top tier of the subscription. So you get all of these stories. I'm always going to be kind and respectful for the most part. But if people interact with me in person, they may not get all that stuff. And it's just because haven't gotten to the next level of the subscription. That joke aside, um, I am truly like honored and just happy to be here with you all. The fact that you all wanted to talk to me is just like, oh my God, that means I'm doing something right. That's fantastic. Like, what a happy coincidence. As far as like where people can find me, um, I'm on LinkedIn under my name, Jeslyn Miller. Now there are two, and both of them are me. So we're talking about being authentic. Both of those accounts are me. Um, one of them, you're going to see like unique and lovely stuff. So it's about my business aspect, and the other one is more corporate. So, like how I show up authentically in that aspect. In both of those accounts, you're going to see storytelling. It just depends on the voice. But yes, if you see Justin Miller, you can follow both. And you might get a kick out of which side you're gonna get. You can also follow me on my website, which is www.uniqueandlovely.biz. Uh, that's where you can learn more about like the origin of my business, our values, our mission, all that great stuff, and also how we pour that mission into wearable reminders of self-love because it's a constant journey. It's not like, oh, one day I decided to wake up and I'm authentic and now everything is right with the world and I don't ever question myself. It's a constant reminder, whether you're listening to affirmations, podcasts like we're having now, you're going to church, you're doing stuff, constantly pouring in to yourselves. And we just like to provide cute little collectibles, apparels, accessory, stationery to help you along that journey. And of course, you can also follow me on Instagram and Facebook at Unique and Lovely. Oh, LLC, sorry.
Unique and Lovely LLC totally matches the person that we know and have known, for years now. And we're so glad we're in the top tier. And, as usual, Jesslyn took all the wind out of my sails with how we're going to, wrap this. How we gonna wrap this up, right? Because she's been doing it. She don't even know, y'all, but she's been doing it all this time, all throughout this podcast. She's been taking our notes and making them her own without even having seen the notes, because that's just how aligned we all are. And so all I can say behind that is thank you very much. Thank you very much for everything that you've said. I do want to just say, when your outside and your insides don't match, if you don't portray what your inside is actually feeling, it really is a detriment to you, but it's also a detriment to the people around you who don't really know your full self, whatever. And so you have grace with yourself and get to know who you are. We all deserve to know who we are on the inside, and we all deserve the space to be able to share that on the outside, right? And I'll just wrap it up like that and hand it back to Tara.
All right, thank you, thank you. So for the audience, we do want to, leave you with just a few actionable takeaways. If you really want to just kind of think about, some of the things that we've talked about. So one of the things that we really talked about was identifying your values. Again, that alignment, right? And so just, identify your values and think about, are you honoring them in all the spaces that you are, that you're in? And if not, why? And then, really evaluate what needs to happen next. Think about, as we've talked about, we are who we are, and we show up, giving as much of ourselves as we feel safe in environments. And when you're in these spaces, feel free to find ways to integrate your identity, right? As Jeslyn had mentioned, as we had mentioned, it is tiring to constantly try to suppress who you are. So even if there's just some small, one thing, I know for me, when I first started working in a scientific organization around a lot of people who did not necessarily come from the same background that I came from, my small way was writing in purple. That was like the first thing I did. And it got called out. People were like, "Why are you writing in purple?" But that was my small way. That was the first thing I did to bring myself to work. I love the color purple. And that was what I was going to do. So, think about just small ways that you can bring things that, remind you and help you feel like you are who you are, even if the space is not overly welcoming to you, or at least feels that way in the moment. And give yourself grace. I'm going to go back to what Jeslyn mentioned. Give yourself grace at the end of the day. We're just starting to talk about authenticity and align and talk about it in terms of people. Give yourself grace. If this doesn't even work for you, then use another term, right? It's a word, it's a term. At the end of the day, we really want to think about being aligned with our values and then being able to show that where we are in the places that we go and be able to share that with the people that we are around, that we are impacting and that we are engaging with. You are enough. That's what I want to leave everyone with. You really are enough. And I'm going to turn it over to Sharon for our final words.
All right. Well, thank you. And I want to, before we go, I want to give a shout out to Jeslyn because she created that beautiful background that's behind Coach Terri and that we are using. And so you see her work right here. You go to her websites, everything, but you see how wonderful her work is. And so we just want to make sure we give a shout out to her and thank her for this wonderful logo and that she made for us. And make sure that you reach out to her, follow her on LinkedIn and all the social media handles that you find her on. Check out her website and whatever else she may have coming up next, writing a book or doing her own podcast. Who knows? All right. So
no pressure.
No pressure. No pressure. And we will thank you for being as authentic as you are with us in this moment. We appreciate that.
Thank you.
So I just want to make sure that our listeners know that next time when you're diving into how to actually live authentically, having boundaries, identifying yourself and rebuilding, reimagining, emotional safety, and giving yourself permission to evolve all comes with being authentic. And those are things that are important. And doing it at the pace and time that you feel comfortable. We want to thank you for being a part of this conversation here today with our Real Talk Coaching. And if there was something that you heard that inspired you, that stirred your spirit, made you think, or gave you hope, make sure that you share it in the comments. Make sure that you like and subscribe so you can always know when our next episode has dropped. And come back for more. We're always here to help you as we can. So if there's any type of topic, question, or you just want to have a conversation or just leave us your thoughts, please email us at info@realtalkcoaching.net. That's realtalkcoaching.net. That's what I love about recordings, because sometimes we can edit. All right. Thank you all so much and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.